Hey guys, this is Alex Davis. On this week's show, we have John Watkins. John is local to the area and just sold his business last year after 23 years of business ownership. He talks to us about dreaming big and about reaching a certain level of business success. So without further ado, let's go.
Today, we've got our good friend John on the show with us today, and John is a local entrepreneur. He started a successful erosion control and sold that company last year, and we're going to get to dive kind of deep into his childhood and what led to the success of his business. So we're super excited to have you on, John. Thank you for coming today, man.
I appreciate it.
Man, we're excited. So I guess to start off, tell us a little bit about, your childhood, kind of where you came from and all that good stuff.
I was born in Austell, Cobb General Hospital, and lived in Smyrna until I was about 4, and we moved to Cedar Crest Road. And it was Cobb County, but you look to the right out of my driveway and you can see the Paulding County sign. Played a little bit of baseball there, but really everything I cared about was riding motorcycles and bicycles, and Cedar Crest Road was a great place for that. Most of it was a dirt road on the Paulding County end at that time, and
It's hard to believe.
no Bentwater, no Seven Hills, none of that. And so it was a really good place to just be free and ride as far and long as you wanted to. Because it was Cobb County, I went to North Cobb High School, graduated there in 92, but and eventually I went to KSU, Kennesaw State, for my degrees.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And what was your degrees in?
Business management was what I got a degree in, but I wasn't ready to go to work yet, and I'm like, man, as soon as I graduate, I'm really working full time.
Yeah.
So I stayed and got a marketing degree as well. So once you get to that level of courses, a couple of more is this degree, a couple of more is that degree. So I stayed and graduated at the same time as my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So get those 2 degrees, and then do you go straight from college into?
No, so KSU was it was just a school that was close to my house, and I was big into racing motorcycles. I mean, that's really all I cared about was racing, and KSU allowed me to be close to home. Yeah. And so I just didn't realize, because it was the school closest to me, that their business school has like a really good reputation nationwide. I mean, I had companies reaching out to every graduate, but they were reaching out, and they're like, hey, you graduated from the Coles School of Business,
Yeah.
I'm over here like, it's 8 miles from my house. So that's where I went. And I'm not thinking it's special or anything, but they treated it like it was. A lot of interviews, they all said the same thing. So my first job, I started 2 weeks after I graduated. It was for a company that distributed RV parts to camper dealerships. So I sat in a corporate office. I helped with ad design and making sure that products were marketed properly. And if they didn't sell, I had to tell them why. And if I thought they could sell, I had to redesign the ads to make it to where we could really try to sell it. And, it was one of those jobs where I didn't hate the work, but I sat in an office with no windows. I sat in an office wearing a suit and a tie. And that is not what I want to have on. I was so uncomfortable with that. Just the dress code, really. And then the corporate, the high-end corporate is a $100 million company. So
Oh, wow.
the high-end corporate attitudes inside there, I just wasn't used to it. I'm an outside guy. As time rolled on, sitting in there wearing a tie and not crossing other people's path, just me in an office, uncomfortable. I knew I couldn't make it.
Miserable.
Yeah, I was going to be
was no
miserable.
fun.
I couldn't make it very long, for sure.
So I guess you worked there. What year was this, by the way? What time?
That's 1998.
Okay.
The first part of 98. And so, again, on the motorcycles, I loved racing motorcycles. And my best friend at the time, we raced every single weekend. We rode together to the races, and they're telling me, we've got hours in the truck each weekend because we're racing all over the place. And they're telling me, hey, I know you hate your job. Why don't you start an erosion control business? And I'm like, what? I don't know what he's talking about. But at that time, and so in 98, there was a ton of new legislature regarding erosion control, but there weren't a ton of companies that did this kind of work. So these builders are calling for this new requirement, and the companies that were available were like, it'll be 3 weeks before we can get to you. 4 weeks. It was a pretty prime time. Yeah. So my friend talked me into taking some days off work. He showed me what equipment I needed to rent, what materials I need to buy, and he let me work on a job he was doing. So, because he's in the grading business, he's moving dirt. So I did the work, and it was August. I was in decent shape for motocross, but all of a sudden, to have a sledgehammer and shovels and all, like for real physical labor, I was not in shape for that. So when it was over, I'd called in sick to work. That's how I got out of work in order to be able to do this side job. And I had to take an extra day off work because I was sunburned, and I'm like, man, I was sick. So how did I get the sun? So I better call in sick one more day. And, I go back in on Monday and I'm like, I hated that. That was awful, man. That was the most physically demanding thing I've done.
Wow.
And 30 days later, I got the check. And that check was a snapshot in time. It was no workers' comp, no general liability. I mean, you can relate, right? Those are expensive items to have, and I didn't have them. I just had materials, machine, and income. 3 things. I was like, wow. I just worked 3 days. I mean, and at the time, we were living on my wife's salary, and then I made less than her. She was a school teacher. And so mine wasn't a big one if we said, hey, quit your job and try this business. Yeah. I didn't make a bunch of money. So it was easy to say, well, I'm not really making anything anyway. Mm-hmm. So let's give it a try. So I got that check, and I'm looking at this little snapshot in time, and I'm going, man, this is incredible profit margin. But it just wasn't accurate. Yeah. It's not as profitable as my initial calculation. But I quit my job. I gave them a 1-month notice, and they let me work the whole month, which is surprising to me because generally when you turn in a notice for a company, I mean, they'll tell you thank you and let you go on because they know you're done, absolutely. Right? So they let me work, and the most amazing thing to me is, I don't know a ton about what I'm about to be doing, but I was very willing. Like I'm super unhappy in my job. Yeah. There's not going to be a lack of effort on my part because it's awful. I'm not happy, and I want to be happy. So I'm going to make this work. So I'm all in. But I just think it's clear as a bell looking back on it. But at the time, I get my first call. The first, hey, I'd like to use you for erosion control. And it's a guy named Doug Hall who lives in the Windrift subdivision off of Dabbs Bridge. And he gives me his address. I drive over there, and his driveway says Malachi Path. And I drive in there, and he shows me what to do. I do the work. And so we're finished, and I said, hey, Doug, tell me why you named your street here Malachi Path. He goes, well, I requested 310 Malachi Path. And I know we're talking about a book in the Bible. Mm-hmm. He goes, my business just did so well, and I believe it did well because I always tithed properly. And Malachi 3:10 says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse and see if I don't pour open so much blessing that you can't contain it. It even says, test me in this. And it's the only place in the Bible where God says, test me. Yeah. And so that had a big impact on me, just hearing that. But he goes, they didn't give me 310, and that's what I requested. And I go, well, what did they give you? And he goes, they gave me 312. And I said, well, what does 312 say? He goes, well, 312 says, for yours is a beautiful land, and they will call you blessed. Wow. And this is a house sitting on a hill overlooking a big lake. Wow. I was like, well, so we okay with 312? He goes, yeah, it's okay. 312 is good, but I just didn't realize it that day But that next Sunday, I gave my first tithe check. And, you know, new business startup, I don't know what I'm going to make. I don't have a clue, man. It was a shot in the dark. But I knew what my wife made. So I put $2,000 in that offering plate. And I'm like, man, you know, it's scary. I mean, I lifted it back out and I put it back, but I let it go. I sent it. But an hour later, I didn't regret it. I didn't have any nerves. That was a lot of money at the time. I mean, you know, we had already spent my entire wife's savings account. She put the down payment on the house. She bought the first tractor for this business. Wow. And it was her money. And so we didn't have any cushion left. We'd spent it all on those two things. And so for me to just say I'm going to tithe, I was just so inspired by what Doug said. And I look back on that and I'm like, there is no chance that was an accidental first customer.
Yeah.
I mean, that was God like saying, here's who you work for. I want to be able to trust you with your money one day. It was like a test. That's powerful. We weren't making any money at the time. And I think, you know, I know if God can trust you with a little money, he will put you in charge of a lot of money. Amen. So it sort of cemented a nice base to grow a business. I just didn't know it at the time. I didn't know. Yeah. Looking back, it's so clear.
Man, and that story just, you know, with us starting our business, we all came together and we decided to put God in the forefront of it. And I think that's the only reason we're still in business to this day. Mm-hmm. You know, we were idiots and started a business in 2020 when there was something going on crazy in the world. Yeah. But it's just wild to me that God, you know, he basically provided for you in that moment, that there was no coincidence that was your first customer. Yeah. Because that's powerful, man, for you to even be aware of what was going on and then to be faithful with your money. Yeah.
It was very inspiring, you know, and I crossed Doug's path a couple of years ago, and I went up, I saw him on the square in Marietta, and I said, hey man, maybe you won't know this, you won't remember me. I don't know that he remembered me. I mean, he was nice and he smiled, but I said, you changed my life. You really did, because, you know, I knew you should put some money in the offering plate, but to actually be purposeful and to really step out on a limb, because, you know, Malachi 3:10 says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. And as time went on, you know, that very first time I did bring the whole tithe. I mean, that was 10% of my wife's annual salary that I put in that plate that day. Mm. And as time went on, I realized, like, you can't outgive God. Mm. So every year, you know, you're self-employed. You don't know what you're going to make at the end of the year. You don't have a clue what's going to happen. But in January, every year from then on, I went and I wrote a check. And sometimes I may have given more than 10%, and sometimes I had to write another check to catch up to make it 10%. But I never once was burned by that. Yeah. You know, it always rewarded me.
Yeah. And I think that's a good message for everybody to learn.
Yeah.
Everybody listening to learn.
Another thing you had said too is when you guys had started, you kind of analyzed your entire life, looked at your wife's salary, and then noticed that you could live off of just it. But would you say that's why you took the risk and jumped into business, is because you saw that those boxes were checked?
Yeah, I would have never done it if we couldn't live on one salary.
Yeah.
If she didn't work and I was the only salary, I would have never taken that leap.
Well, I think I see a lot of people, and you know, sometimes people are in fear because they do have kids and things get tighter and you get kind of locked in as you get older. But that's why I think when you're young, it's amazing to take as much risk as you can.
Yeah.
Literally. And I think that's kind of, you know, your story is going to show why taking that risk really can work out. But that's a really cool thing to do is take that risk at a young age.
Yeah. There wasn't a bunch to lose. I mean, if I just didn't get any work, then I didn't get any work. We still were going to eat.
Marketing company.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
something that I think stands out to me is you saw an opportunity with the new legislation that was changing the game with the erosion.
Yeah,
you saw the opportunity and acted on it. There's definitely something to be said about that.
Well, so you know, and it was getting. We were talking about it every week heading to these motorcycle races. I was made aware of it. You know, I didn't, I would have never known about the opportunity had my friend not told me.
Yeah.
But the willingness to act on opportunity, it showed its head throughout my career. You know, there's tons of times when I didn't necessarily want to take certain leaps or risk, but I always did. Yeah. Every single time. If the conditions were right, I did it. Sometimes I did it when the conditions weren't right, but there's always times to learn, right? But,
absolutely.
But that initial, here's what the guy told me, I'm going to try it. And I was just so unhappy in my job that it made that first one easy.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah.
The next time you have to decide on whether you're going to take a risk. It's not always, you're not always super unhappy with where you're at.
Yeah.
So
you go into the erosion control, and we're 3 years into our business now, and business is good, but there's so many hurdles in starting a new business. Mm-hmm. Walk us through kind of that, because I know when I heard about John, I was working for the city of Dallas years ago, and he was just super successful, super cool, somebody that I really looked up to, and you didn't even know me at the time. I just was like, my entrepreneur mindset, I was like, man, this guy's doing it, and was really inspired by you, but I know it didn't happen overnight. No. So walk us through kind of the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So initially, we bought the one tractor with my wife's savings account, and I just hooked my truck that I had, half-ton truck, pulling the machine around, which I would never do today. But, I bought the materials that I needed for that day or week, and I used the materials. It was real simple. It was just, here's what I need to do this week's work. And it was me, and I had my friend's son. He would work just when I needed him. He didn't have to have a certain number of hours. It was the perfect start. I'm not paying someone for hours, because I only had maybe 1 hour a day of work at the beginning. So I would do that work, and then I'd come home and I would bill that work and try to collect the money for it. But as time went on, we got busier and we couldn't keep up with one truck. So we added a second truck and added a third truck, and all of a sudden I'm working from 7 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And the only way to, erosion control, you always end up working late. A lot of times to get tractors stuck, it's going to rain, we got to beat the rain, those kind of things. But the only way to stay ahead of it was to do the billing each day for what you did that day. So I had to do it when I got home. And so now you finish that at 11:30, maybe 12, and you're getting back up at 6 to be working at 7. And man, it was hard. It was super hard. And at the time, the first time I ever did erosion control, I was like, that is so hard. But I started in October of 98. So those first 6 months were kind of through the winter, and the ground is softer in the winter. So I was like, this isn't bad, and it's not hot, so I'm not, the difficulty in the work was way down through the winter at first. So I get 6-7 months in, we're adding the second truck. I'm handwriting each invoice. And it's got a carbon copy, so I got the carbon over here, and when the check comes in, I match it up, staple. It was not a good system, So a year later, so in 1999, I finished out one room in my basement, a tiny room, and I got my sister to come one day a week, and I would just stack that billing up, and she would bill everything. Well, at this point, it's going into the computer finally, because the only way for me to know I didn't get paid was to sift through these carbon copies and just say, well, golly, that's old, and so it became a little more professional once she started, because she would say, this guy hadn't paid you in 30 days. It made it easier to track everything.
Yeah.
And I could come home I was still working 7 in the morning until 8, 9, 10 o'clock, but I could go to bed when I got home. So we added the second truck, and around that time, the guy that would work just whenever I needed him, we were racing motorcycles still as hard as we could race, and the amateur national finals are at Loretta Lynn's house every year. So we're in 2 different classes. I qualify, and I'm like, hey, I need you to stay here and run the business this week coming up in August, because I'm going to be gone. And he's like, no, I want to go. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't qualify technically. So at that point, he went up there anyway as an alternate. And there's a ton of rules when you put 1,400 riders in one place for a week. And rules for good reason. You know, it's all kids and they're all crazy. And so this one guy in my buddy's class, he jumped off the bridge down in front of Loretta Lynn's house. And that's a no-no. You can't jump off the bridge into the creek. So he got kicked out, which means my buddy got in. So first lap of practice, maybe second lap, he crashes and destroys his knee. I mean, ACL, MCL, PCL, every ligament in there. Goodness. So he's out for 8 or 9 months. And I had shut the business down for the week, and I think about that. I can't believe it. The new business, you know, and I've already told my customers, we'll take care of anything, no matter what, except for this week, you know. So,
gotta go race.
But nobody held it against me. You know, I went up there, up on this, they call it Stagecoach Hill, a little bit of a phone signal. I would check my messages. And I would call the guy back. I can't get to that till Monday, you know. So I come straight home from Loretta Lynn's on Sunday and straight back to work on Monday. But now I'm down one guy because my buddy has hurt his knee really bad. And so I had to end up hiring some people. And thankfully, we were, it seemed like if I added the truck, it was immediately busy. And if I added 2 more guys, I wasn't hunting for hours for them.
Real quick, I want to let you know, we also own a couple of different insurance agencies in the local area, and I've lived in Dallas, Georgia my entire life. If you guys ever need a quote on your auto, your home, your business, or your life insurance, keep us in mind. Now let's get back to the show.
I need more workers. Like I don't have enough guys. And he goes, you can take him. And that dude's like leaned up over there sleeping. And I go, I don't know, you know. He goes, no, he works hard. And I said, okay. So the next morning, I just picked him up in that subdivision. And I said, you're going with me today. And he goes, okay. And his name was Fabiano. And we called him Fabulous. We're like, hey, Fabulous. Everything, his name was Fabulous.
That's funny.
But he did work hard. And then, of course, he had friends. So every employee I got for a little while was Fabulous's friend.
What about to hire a guy named Fabio?
His name's going to be Fabulous. You have to call him that. That's his given name. You can call him Fabio, but his given name's Fabulous.
What was his 1 out of 10 work ethic on Fabiano or whatever you said?
Fabiano, he was near a 9. I mean, he was hard, dude. He worked hard.
There might be a spiritual thing there.
I think it's just the name, right? It's given to hard workers.
Man, so you get into it and you're rock and rolling. You keep adding trucks. And at this point, have you already like got your own spot? Are you?
No, so at this point I'm still parking on the farm. My friend who I raced with every weekend, he said, "Hey, you can park here," and you know he wouldn't take rent, and that used to drive me crazy. So I would try to pay him rent, he'd hand it back to me. So we start doing other things, like they've got probably 7 miles of fence on his property. So one summer we painted his fence, you know, and. So every day we'd finish work, and it might be 3:30 or 4:30. We didn't have, during the summer when it quits raining, erosion control slows down. It's the opposite of most trades. So we would finish work at 3:30 and work till 7:30 or 8 painting fences. And I tried to pay my rent that way. But somewhere around 03, and I know it was 03 because we bought our first dump truck and my son was born. I look around one day, we're on my friend's farm, and I've got 25 employees by this point.
Holy cow.
And we're running 5 trucks.
Wow.
And I go, it's irresponsible of me to not stand on my own. Mm-hmm. You know, I wanted to be responsible. And so I started looking, and I found the place on Hardy Street.
Yeah.
And the lady wouldn't sell it to me. So I rented it for a year and then talked her into selling it to me. But that's where we were able to have 25 employees on our own, and know that we're not being a bad neighbor or anything, because by that point I've worn my welcome out.
Yeah.
Staying, and I tried to pay in other ways to offset the fact that he would never take rent from me, but. It was the responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
Was, even though it sort of damaged the relationship for me to leave, I still to this day don't understand why, but he told me, when you leave, we're not going to be close anymore. And it was an
That is odd.
odd thing to put on me, but that's what I was told. And but I just couldn't. I needed to be my own, responsible. You know, I'm going to provide the office where we're going to do business for these employees, you know, and so I did it. And it gave us a lot more room that we knew was ours, you know, because at the farm, you know, I started out taking up 2 bays of a pole barn, and the next thing you know, I really needed that whole pole barn, and sure could use a few more over here. You know, when you have 25 people parking plus the 5 work trucks, you know, that's a lot of space.
It's a big outfit.
So we were able to get in our new space, and because of like the expenses with having that, it just motivated me more. Let's get more work. Let's get more trucks. And, you know, so 04 and 05, I'll specifically remember these 2 trucks. We added 2 Isuzu 5500s. And for good reason, I financed those 2 trucks. And I went and bought the trucks, had a loan, you know, and I'm 5-6 months in, I'm making payments. And I don't know why. I was irritated with the monthly payment. I didn't like making it. It didn't feel good to mail that money off, right? I kind of flashed back to being 12 years old. And my granddad, you know, I'm 12, things your granddad say when you're 12, you know, I didn't think it had any effect on me. But he had lived through the Great Depression, and he owed people money when the Depression hit, and he spent the decade after the Depression was over. He spent that next decade paying off bills of debts he had rang up. So when I was 12, he says to me, don't ever finance anything. Don't ever borrow money from anybody. Well, here I am, I'm 6 months into a loan, and I'm like, what am I doing? I mean, you know, I just looked at the bank account, and I had enough money to pay those 2 trucks off. Back then, trucks were not as much money as they are today. But it's still a significant amount of money. But I just paid it off. And from then on, we never financed another thing. And awesome. I never knew when I was 12 years old that those words, I didn't know they meant anything to me.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're 12, you don't know what it means, borrow money. What is it? You know, why would I borrow money? It didn't have any effect that day. But man, it formed how I did business moving forward. It really did. And I became obsessed with what is the most affordable long term. Well, if you're using your own money, I mean, I'm saving 7 or 8%, I think was the loan rate back then. I'm at least saving that. So I'm getting this vehicle for true cost, not true cost plus interest. And I began to operate like that on materials. I began to go, well, let's buy 18-wheeler loads of everything. And let's buy 10 18-wheeler loads if we can. Now, sometimes you couldn't just buy any amount you wanted to get that price break. But I bought exactly the amounts that I could and got whatever discount was available to me. And I would pay for those materials the minute they showed up. I would hand the driver the check. You know, I tried to make these people know, if you're deciding on whether or not to sell to Watkins, you should sell to Watkins, because he hands the drivers the check when the materials get dropped.
That's amazing. That
really did help us to be more competitive. And it allowed me to get back to that. I didn't get quite back to that initial margin analysis on the first job I did, because now I do have insurance and workers' comp.
Now you got a building.
Yeah, and I have a building, and, you know, paper towels and all the stuff you got to fill up that building. But I got every discount that was available for what I was doing.
And that reputation matters. Like, you got the reputation off of it more so than
this
like
guy
just
pays.
handing. Yeah,
right
this guy
on the
pays.
spot.
So
he's the guy I want to deal with.
I want to deal with him before these other guys.
Well, and I can tell you, so that's 04, 5, 6. That's leading into the recession of 07, 08, 9. A couple of those years, I was able to get materials when competitors weren't, because they didn't pay their bills. And that kept us working a little deeper into that coming recession, you know. And a lot of our competitors
That shows how important that integrity and reputation can be. I want to touch on something you said. When you got your new building, you said it kind of put your back against the wall. And I just think it's funny how when you like force yourself into that uncomfortable position and you basically have to grow, how it always works. And I don't know, just say, you got anything to say about that specific scenario? Because you go from no rent, which losing the relationship part, honestly, that's kind of weird. But no rent, and now you have all these bills. And I know when we've gotten into situations, even in our first 3 years, like you get in those situations, well, you know you're about to level up because you're being forced to. Yeah. Life is handing you the cards that you're going to have to do something with them. So.
Yeah, so I can say, I've always said, well, this is America. You know, all we need is an opportunity. Mm-hmm. If we can have the opportunity, we'll make it. And, you know, with opportunity comes the need to be responsible with your level of business. It was irresponsible of me with a 5-truck business and 25 employees to not stand on my own.
Yeah.
Standing on my own created a ton of motivation because I am now, for sure, if I don't pay for this, we don't have anywhere to park now. It just created a lot of extra drive. I think it's good for the right personality to be against the wall.
Same.
Some people check out when the odds are against you, and I never did. If I wasn't the best at something, well, I found someone who was and offered them a job. I mean, one of my guys, during the 2009 recession, a lot of people lost their jobs.
Oh, yeah. A ton.
A lot of my employees lost their jobs. I mean, there was a point where I was losing $8,000 a week.
Wow.
On payroll alone, you know, and I sat there and I could do the math because I'm like, well, we got this much and we're losing $8,000 a week. So if everything just sits here, you knew what day you were going to fail. And that was during the time social media came out, and I swear to you, I paid. My guys tried to work every morning. We did, and we had all our trucks paid for. I think there were 7 trucks during the 07, 08 years. There may have been 1 or 2 more, but we just alternated trucks each day, and they would go out for an hour or so. I had to downsize the team to about 20 that I was not willing to lose. And that number was sustainable. And they tried to stay every day. They would say, man, tell us what to do. But the shop's clean. The trucks are clean. All of our customers are out of business. I mean, they really are. And if they're not, they're not doing any work. So there was no one to call and try to get work. So Facebook was new, so they had to look at Facebook until 1 o'clock. And I'm like, let's go home, because this is driving me crazy. It's just a reinforcement that we don't have enough work. But I didn't owe anybody anything. It really, once I had my team shrunk down to a size that I felt like we could maintain, there wasn't a ton of burden. I didn't carry a lot of worry. God had always provided for me in leaps and bounds beyond what I had imagined, kind of. Well, not kind of. He definitely provided leaps and bounds beyond what I dreamed of. And so even during 2009, we fell to 25% of the business we had been doing. Wow. So we lost 75% of the business. And we still didn't lose money. And if I was mailing off checks to make payments on trucks, it wouldn't have been an $8,000 a week loss. At that point, it probably would have been $10,000 to $15,000 a month loss. And thankfully, I didn't owe anybody. And so, those were some hard times, but they really helped us to refocus.
Yeah.
And it allowed some guys to leave who wanted to start their own business. It allowed me to get one guy. I started in 2009 maybe 2008, I started trying to get him. I kept saying, hey, but he always had the best job. He always had a good job. But the economy finally bit his company, and I was able to get him.
Wow.
So when we came out of the recession, I had my keys in place to really build.
Yeah.
When things came back.
Man, that lesson your grandpa taught you when you were 12 ended up paying dividends. Because, I was luckily in high school when all that was happening, but my dad was in the trucking business, and I can remember everybody just going out of business. And it was probably most people were, over on their balance sheet and had all these truck payments, all these different, I got a lake house, I got this house, all payments.
Yeah.
So not having those payments probably got you through the recession. So your grandpa paid off.
Yeah, I feel like it was, it saved me from knowing some bad times.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Even working at the city, when I first started there, they hired me because they needed a helper for the stormwater guy who inspected the erosion control. So kind of your niche also got me the job there because they needed a helper for him. And I can remember at the beginning when me and Joey would ride around, there would be 20 builders we'd have to go meet to go over silk fence and job sites. And then, 08, 09 happens. And by the end of 09, it was like, we didn't have nothing to do. I had to go to the water department because stormwater basically went to nothing.
Yeah.
All the builders he had, there was none left. It was just wiped out.
It was a wild time.
Yeah.
Did you ever fear that you would lose the business at that point?
Well, I think I just was optimistic. And I'll tell you, right about the time that I probably would have started to really get on a negative path, a bank calls and they go, hey, we've financed a ton of jobs around Atlanta. We've never laid eyes on them. Our customers have basically turned them back into us, which meant they got foreclosed or something similar. Could we fly in and you take us around and show us these job sites? So we're, of course, yes, come on, we know where everything's at, So these guys would fly in, they'd get in the truck, and we would get the list of names and map out a nice loop to see everything, and we would drive all day. Well, turns out, you get in this subdivision that's been sitting for 2 years, it needs a lot of work. A lot of erosion has happened. 07, 08 was a drought, but 09 was a bad year for rain. That was the year of that. They call it the flood, right?
Yeah.
So we're driving through there and we're going, well, you need to do this and this. And they go, send us estimates. So for like 4 or 5 months, right when there was nothing. There was no one to call. There was nowhere to get work. All of a sudden, we're at least doing estimates. And I mean, we're doing like 40 a day.
Nice.
And so, and then all of a sudden they're approving 40 a day. So it's like back to panic time. We got all this work and we're working for the bank, so the money should be good. But during that time, no one is building anything new. I mean, nothing's coming out of the ground. It's just fix what we got, which led to, hey, could you landscape these 4 houses over here? And, I've got the equipment and I got the guys, so sure, we can landscape. So we start doing some landscaping, and then house still didn't sell. So could you cut the grass over there? We did anything the banks asked during those years. I don't think I had any private customers whatsoever.
Wow.
Our entire customer list was turned off, and it was turned back to 5 or 6 banks who luckily called us. I mean, they saw our name on one of them because our silk fence said Watkins on it, and that's how they contacted us.
Branding right there.
Yeah. Right. So it went from a lot of customers to like 5. And 5 that needed a ton of work. And so we weren't really doing erosion control. I mean, we boarded up townhomes. We blocked off subdivision entrances with gates. I mean, we had a crew that just all day put up gates and blocked off access because people would go back there and dump, and which we would get to clean it up. That was another thing we could do. But it forced me to say, hey man, we're doing all this landscaping. Maybe I should get a little more serious about the landscaping. So we bought what was left of a guy's business and hired him. He knew all the plant names and where those plants would prosper. And he had a really good eye for design. So that started a division called Exceed Landscape Group. And
I remember that.
it really, I wanted Watkins to stay an erosion control contractor because that type of work is really fast-paced, and you might do 200 job sites a day. Here at the end, we did 200 stops a day. But a landscape company, you're going to work on that same job for a week or 2 or sometimes more. Very different. They were very different companies. One was very precise and everything had to be perfect, and this one was go as fast as you can. You got to get to as many calls per day. It really challenged me a lot, and it eventually Exceed grew to be 37 employees and 21 trucks.
Wow.
So for a minute it was bigger because Watkins had shrunk. It was bigger for a minute.
Wow.
But then they eventually rebalanced and Watkins took the lead again, over time.
Yeah.
Man. And with the scope of those 2 businesses, you really grew your skill set. Sounds like, because you were doing fast-paced stuff over here, slower stuff over here. Did you learn things that you didn't already know a lot from the landscape, or was it kind of the same deal, contracting, getting it all out there, the material, and getting it over with?
I would say at the time, I trusted the guy I hired to lead Exceed. So I was getting glimpses of it. But if you ask me today, I know a lot more about landscaping today. I know a lot more about how those businesses should run. I also learned that I am not enough of a perfectionist to truly be a successful landscape contractor.
I feel that.
It has to be perfect. And I'm not, I want it pretty close to perfect.
Yeah.
That's not good enough.
Wow.
You got to be perfect. So really what it did was it made me uncomfortable.
Yes.
It really did. I never dreamed of having my own business. And I never dreamed of having a business that wanted to grow no matter what you did to it. It did. Watkins Erosion wanted to grow. If I had dreamed of a $100 million company, I bet we could have got there. Wow. I just didn't dream that big, and all of a sudden now there's this other set of items, trucks, employees, different shirts, different hats. They're green and then we're orange over here, and I say it like that. That's my company. But it just never felt like home to me. The erosion control really did. I just became uncomfortable because now I didn't really want to do landscaping. I didn't.
You were kind of forced.
It was sort of a recession-induced.
Yeah.
Well, you just shifted into what you could do to make money.
You did what it took.
Now, I'm thankful
Yeah.
for it, but I was never happy and comfortable. So if I had dreamed for all that, I could have made that work. I mean, I had good people. I had great people on both sides. I really had great teams, but I was in a very uncomfortable place because I didn't dream big enough for this. And when the dreams that I had, I accomplished by the time I was 33. Wow. And I've seen everybody be like, yeah, that's great. It's not. It's good and it's bad. You really should have next tier dreams. You should have next level stuff.
So you're saying you wish you would have dreamed bigger from the get-go.
Yeah, I do. And I'll tell you some effects it had. So when you surpass the few dreams that you had, and now this business over here is begging for your attention and resources, and this one's doing the same thing. But you can't fund them both because you're not a multimillionaire. I'm not sitting here with millions in the bank, and I already told you I'm not going to finance anything. So it puts you into a weird spot where growth sort of becomes not the greatest feeling to you, because I'm going to pay cash for all these trucks that are needed each year. That in my mind became a pay cut. Oh, you need 5 trucks? Okay, well, I can get you 5 trucks, but I didn't get paid, right? So because I took all of that company's profit from that year and I bought those trucks, and it was the responsible thing to do. And most people would say, man, that's awesome. And it was. I don't hear me wrong. I feel like Watkins, no matter what I did, it was begging me to grow. We outgrew that Hardy Street location because now we have Exceed sitting there, we have Watkins sitting there. I mean, our guys would wreck the trucks in the parking lot trying to get them out because they were parked so close. And we were parking employees across the street at Raymond's pawn shop, at Jimmy's body shop. Thankfully, they were cool.
Yeah.
Because I would have been forced to do something about it much sooner. My brain was still wired for we're in a recession, but all the signs in my businesses says we are not.
We're booming. Yeah.
We're rolling, and we are adding trucks, we're adding machines, we're adding guys. And so I eventually sort of felt isolated. Like I didn't have a ton of people to talk to. I talked to those that I could about, hey man, the growth thing. Why am I not super happy about it? Yeah. Why do I think, I got to have 5 more trucks? Most people would be so happy that their business needed 5 trucks. How awesome, how exciting. There's a pretty small circle of people that would understand how that isn't always the most wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Most guys are like, God, buy the trucks, man, get to work. And I wanted to, but it was beyond what I had ever dreamed of. So I was in a super uncomfortable place. All I needed was a big dream, and I would have sort of been building a blueprint the whole way. Wow. But instead, I'm past my blueprint. I'm way past it.
Yeah.
And it put me into a weird spot. And I had like depression signs showing up. And my life is great.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. I sat there in my head. This was all in my head. The depression symptoms and everything, but it was real. I really did have depression, but I just felt so alone over the success of it, and that is mind-boggling to me. All I needed was one dream that says, make this thing $100 million company, make it a $50 million company, whatever size your dream needed to be, because I never deviated from my tithe to God ever. And I even, to this day, know that if I had just had that blueprint, if I just had the dream of growing to this level, I mean, I feel like God would have He was throwing the opportunity as hard and fast as He could. I was the resistance.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't comfortable, having 5 more trucks on the road. It's a lot of liability.
Man, it
to
is.
have that many employees driving your vehicles. And I've already said it was 7 a.m. till 10:30 at night, sometimes later. Well, you're at home by 10, you're at home by 8 or whatever, 7, 6, whatever time you get home. But that liability is still out there.
Still rolling.
And it's still going up and down the road.
Yeah.
So it all felt heavy to me.
Yeah.
And I just believe the simple thing would have been to have dreamed bigger.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have felt so alone and uncomfortable with that level of growth.
What a message for the viewers, though, and for me, as we're trying to build our business. I've had so many people that I follow, Grant Cardone and all these people who say you got to truly 10X your goals and your dreams. So
Truth.
To have you say that, it's so real for me to dream bigger. It's hard to do because a lot of times you set ceilings on yourself.
You don't have
know
the
what I mean?
confidence to
You don't
dream
have the
that big.
confidence. Yeah.
I can tell you that people should say, if you're self-employed, you need to set goals. And your last couple of goals just need to be so high that you want to achieve it. What should be talked about a little bit is if you don't set these goals, there are side effects that will happen. Because what if your business goes to a level you didn't dream about, and all of a sudden you just feel very alone because you don't have many people to talk about. Most people want success and they want more stuff. They want that lake house and all that stuff. I mean, I typically drove the oldest vehicle in the company. My sales guys, I gave them newer stuff and I kept the oldest. I didn't really allow myself to feel like we were successful. I had a nice house and my property was nice, all this stuff, but I didn't necessarily ever feel like I deserved it.
Wow.
We were past what I dreamed of and everything was great. But because I didn't dream of it, it was just a road I didn't ever think I would be on.
Mm-hmm. And
I
on
tell
top
my
of that,
kids.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I tell my kids, you need to dream big. I say it to them too much. Hopefully they hear me.
I think
I don't think there's a
it's
such
awesome,
thing as too
man.
much on that.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Because that's the truth. And on top of that, our entire country is in a recession at this point. So a lot of even if you were to go to someone and say, hey, I'm having success, they might be not having success at that time too, which maybe made it uncomfortable.
Well, my entire customer list went out of business. So those were people that I was close to, and I couldn't call them and talk to them about that. I mean, their business failed during those years. And some of them, if they had just known, they could have retired and been super rich. Mm-hmm. If they had known the recession was coming. But they worked on through it because they weren't quite at an age you should retire at. And then they lost everything. It's terrible. So I didn't have this giant circle anymore. I had a small circle. And the small circle, was supportive when I did need to talk. But because of the depression stuff, I always just felt like they were looking at me with a weird eye, like, man, who is this guy complaining about the fact that his business is growing like crazy? I wasn't really complaining. I don't want it to sound wrong. It was doing things I just didn't plan for.
Yeah.
I never dreamed that we would ever have 41 trucks, 115 employees running out of 4 locations. I just never pictured that. All I had to do was dream it. If I had dreamed for 10 locations, I'd be like, okay, we only got 4 now. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Been back up against a wall again because my goal created urgency, right? I didn't have the goals.
And so you didn't have the urgency.
I wasn't backed against the wall and having to do something.
So when you started the business, did you ever you never dreamed that you would get to the level that we're about to talk to at the end, where because the craziest part for me was when you bought the bowling alley, like the bowling alley that I grew up going to.
Yeah, everybody grew up going
That's a
there.
local place.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a local, pillar in our community, and then it goes out of business probably close. I don't know when you bought
13,
it.
I think it went out of business.
Yeah, so it goes out of business, and then the next thing I know, I hear Watkins is buying it. I'm like, that is so cool.
Yeah, it turns
so
it
how,
into a town.
How, I mean, obviously you didn't have the dreams and admirations, but how did you feel that day when you bought that building?
So I told you the trucks were wrecking in the parking lot at Hardy Street. I mean, we were getting all our damage to the vehicles in the parking lot.
As an insurance agent, that makes me shudder.
Yes. So my brain stayed in recession mode a little too long, and I was irresponsible in not buying a bigger place sooner. So that bowling alley, I called one day. They wanted $1.5 million for it. And I'm like, no way. Mostly because I didn't dream big enough that I could buy something that cost $1.5 million. So I closed that idea down. And then one day, me and my wife were driving by, and she goes, call on that again. So I called, and it was $500,000 now.
And how much time?
2 years.
Okay.
2 years later. And so I meet the agent up there, and he lets me in, and it is a full bowling alley. Disco balls, man. Black lights for cosmic bowling,
It's just been sitting for 2 years like that?
Yeah, 2 or 3, 2, yeah.
Wow.
So this was end of 2015. And so I made him an offer. A little bit less, and we countered back and forth, and I was able to get it. And then I was able to sell everything in it, which still blows my mind to this day.
Yeah, who would want that?
Everything in the Paulding County Bowling Center is in Louise. Let's see. You can cut this out. What's the name where the show? There's a remodel show over there in Laurel, Mississippi.
Yep.
So okay, everything that's in the Paulding County Bowling Center is now in Country Lanes Bowling Center in Laurel, Mississippi.
They reused it.
They had a team that stayed here, and then they had a team in Laurel. The team in Laurel would say, take this particular thing out first and send it. So disassemble, send. And so this thing's coming apart right before my eyes. The funniest part was that thing had 3,000 bowling balls.
Good grief.
I'm talking bowling balls for days. Well, this guy shows up with a 48-foot gooseneck trailer behind a 2500 Chevrolet, and he starts loading bowling balls on this thing. And he had just built the sides out of like 2x4s and plywood. And I noticed the tires are really squatting, and I go, hey, man, like, you got to go to Laurel, Mississippi. Like, this is way overloaded. He said, be fine. We'll just go slow. He went, and he made it. But could you imagine 3,000 bowling balls in a wreck or something? I mean, just
so you
going
didn't
everywhere.
keep any bowling lanes or anything? You
No,
just
and I
totally got it.
contemplated ways to do it. But those, the equipment inside that bowling center started in West Palm Beach, new, in like 1970. Wow. Then it went to Bankhead Lanes. Bankhead sold it to Paulding Bowling Center, and they put it in. They had 2 full-time mechanics. That thing broke every 5 minutes. The day I got it, everything worked. And then my family went up there one Sunday, and we just bowled. You could make it about 15 minutes per lane until something broke.
Wow.
And we just moved down. Every bit of it was broke at the end of that day. It had like 20 lanes, so.
I mean, when you're at a bowling alley, I feel like there's only like 200 balls out there. Like, where the heck were the
So
3,000
in the
at?
back was just rows and rows and rows of bowling balls on these racks.
Yeah.
It also had so many pairs of shoes that you can't even believe how many pairs of shoes. And so I got them out, and I tied the shoestrings together on every single pair, and they all had a match. I couldn't believe it. And the guy was grateful that bought it from me. I mean, we negotiated a deal. He bought it, and he set it up, and it's all over there, open and functional.
I need to go there and play.
Yeah, I went by there one day. We were headed to a race.
So fun.
We went to an arena cross race in Mississippi, and I said, we're going to see this bowling alley.
Man.
I just looked in, and left. I didn't stay.
That had to be so cool, though, just the story of the whole grind of getting there to buy that building, and then what y'all did to it, man. When we walked in to do that video that day, the inside of that place was phenomenal that y'all created.
Real quick, we wanted to let you guys know that we are licensed realtors. So if you're looking to buy, sell, or even get a guaranteed cash offer on your home, we have a team of agents that's ready to go to work for you. So if we can help you with that, please let us know. Now, let's get back to the show.
So you get the bowling alley, and this is about the time that I'm working at the city. I'm probably, you're on my radar of people of interest in our community, and then you buy the bowling alley. I'm like, what the heck? But I feel like at that point, y'all explode, because I start seeing Watkins trucks everywhere, like truly everywhere.
So every time I gave the business room to grow, it would grow to whatever level I gave it. That's why I say I should have dreamed bigger. I should have had huge aspirations, because every limit I ever gave it, we reached that limit really quickly. Part of the reason we made it, and it felt like a big boom, it really was a big boom. But the people that were builders before the recession of 2009, they start trying to do things again around 16. Mm-hmm. And they would call and they'd go, oh my God, you guys are still in business. And they were surprised that we made it. Mm-hmm. And we got a ton of work. That word spread, hey, you remember Watkins? They're still in business, because my competitors, tons of them failed during that time. And we made it. We were one of the few that made it. And so we began to grow at a rate that was hard to believe. That's awesome. I finally wasn't devoting some attention to Exceed and some to Watkins. We could just fund the growth for Watkins.
Yeah, because you sold Exceed at that point, right?
Yes. In 2018, we sold Exceed, and we freed up all this space in the parking lot, and we filled it right back up, like pretty quickly. Because at this point now, we've got a big set of tandem trucks. We're hauling asphalt every day. We ended up with 6 tandem dump trucks hauling asphalt. And then we've got all of the silt fence crews and grassing crews and hydroseeding trucks, and a total of 41 trucks on the road at that point.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Because I saw them everywhere.
Yeah. And we did work everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd be in Atlanta doing something and see a Watkins truck going down the interstate. I'm like, good grief, they're everywhere.
Well, I would get pictures late at night, and it's always like Friday night, 10 o'clock, Watkins truck on 285 headed back, or whatever. And it always was a reminder, like, hey, man, this thing never quits moving.
Yeah.
It's 24/7.
Because for us, it's a dream, and I'm dreaming big now.
Yeah.
Listening to you, I'm gonna take my dreams to the next level myself. But what are some lessons that you learned? Because to get to that point, there's got to be so many lessons that you learned over your career. What's like a one that stands out that would really help somebody that's going into that?
Yeah. So I told you about you should dream big, and the other thing, as you grow a business, you cannot necessarily be best friends with your employees. There has to be limits. You cannot be tolerant of bad behavior in the business place. I was super tolerant because these guys had been through a recession with me, and they had seen how we almost failed, and they had seen us succeed. They truly felt like family. But I was too tolerant of their bad behaviors. I mean, we let things happen every week that should have never happened. Mm-hmm. And they would just do it again because there was no real repercussions. Mm-hmm. You have to have limits. And if you don't know what those limits are, just be aware that you can't be tolerant of everything, and bad things will happen, and you'll develop some limits. Yeah. Because I was just too tolerant for too long with bad behavior in the workplace. And I ended up having to have, which every business should have. If I had dreamed bigger, I would have known I'm about to have an HR guy. But I had to have an HR guy just to sort of help me reel in the bad behavior that was this wide when really it should have been this wide. Mm-hmm. And I would say, dream really big. Do not be tolerant of bad behavior. People will respect you more if you stop the bad behavior as soon as it happens. They really will. Long term, if you're looking to deal with less stress and headache, don't have tolerance, because you will have less stress and headache. I had tons of things that happened to me solely because I didn't put a stop to the bad behavior when it was this wide. Mm-hmm. because if it's this wide, we're going to get a little wider on the next bad behavior. And I just had certain offenders, in the business that created most of the stress, And so I would say dream big, don't be tolerant, and don't necessarily try to be best friends with your employees.
Yeah. And I mean, I can relate because it's, even in our 3 years, it's a hard balance, especially when you're having your friends and your family work for you, to not be tolerant. But the saying's so true, like if you give an inch, they're going to take a mile.
For sure.
And I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's
human
so
nature.
true.
It's just
It's human nature.
It's humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like he said, I mean, we totally understand the heart in that too. And obviously, we talk mostly about business on here, but dude, that's the situation for there's some family relationships that could be the case. There's outside of work, that's a lesson for lifetime versus just in business. But we can really apply it to our business.
Well, and I had always had my sister running my books, and she was in charge of our office. And so a lot of these bad behaviors, they were most destructive to her. She kept our office in perfect financial condition. The books were to the penny at all times.
Wow.
And what drove me crazy about her throughout my entire business life was how she was OCD and everything had to be perfect. And then what was so amazing about her was the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It just took me years to appreciate it. And, I look back at my tolerance of the bad behaviors because they affected her. She's in the office and everybody else is out on a cruise somewhere, so they don't really know everything that happens. People in the office knew. And I should have put a stop to the things that happened. My tolerance should have never been as high as it was. But I let it go too long.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that though, because
Yeah.
that helped me immediately.
There's coaches, family members, parents and business owners that all could use these messages.
Yeah, the tolerance thing is hard when you feel like it's family and friends, but
So
you always
hard.
hear them say, "Oh, it's just business."
Yeah.
Well, it's business, and in business, your family and friends that work for you need to know, hey, we do have a limit,
I love that.
but they'll sort of run over you. You can't be tolerant of it.
What a good lesson.
Yeah.
So you talked about your sister being so OCD. Did that lead to when you go to sell? Did that help the sale? Let's get into the sale.
Yeah.
now.
So my phone started ringing at the end of 2021 a lot with these out-of-state numbers, and they would leave voicemails. I knew what they wanted. They wanted to buy my business, and at that point, I'm 47. I'm not in a position to sell my business. I'm not ready to sell my business. I'm happy. My life is good. But the phone kept ringing. And I finally answered. And they were very sizable offers. So it forced me to get with my accountant and go, what do I do? And he says, well, I'll tell you about what I think your business is worth. And that forced me to pick up the phone and call an old friend that I had graduated college with. And all he does is price businesses. He analyzes a business to provide a basis for what it's worth. I said, hey, I need you to get in these books and really give me a number on this business. So he did. And him and my accountant were almost dead on. They were in agreement that they priced the business properly. Well, these offers were coming in at 50% higher than that.
Wow.
And my business analyst guy, I haven't talked to him since college. And he's on the phone going, you listen to me and you listen to me. And you're going to listen to me and you're going to listen to me. And I'm like, what? He goes, you have to take this, man. I don't care if you're wanting to sell. I don't care if you thought this was a good time. I don't care if you think it's a bad time. When this happens, you take it. And such an odd place to be right then because I didn't plan on it. I was just going to hear what they had to say. And all of a sudden, he's like, they're 50% high. You're taking it. I let those words sink in for a little while. And, I didn't really tell anybody. I just sat there with it. And I talked to my wife and, of course, prayed about it. Every second of the day, it's popping into my brain. So I just said, I'm going to pray about this every single time it pops into my head. So I did that for a couple of weeks. And the financial analyst from college, he calls me. He goes, what'd you tell him? I said, I haven't called him back. He goes, you're going to take this deal. And I still haven't talked to him since, but he's right. When somebody offers you 50% more than market value or your perceived market value, you take it. You know, my entire management force sold their houses that year because they were worth more than they had ever been worth. So I call back and I say, hey, I'm going to accept your offer. They go, that's great. We can close it in 45 days. 45 days, that sounded like, oh my gosh, this is really going to happen. Because I was thinking like this might take a year to sell this thing. No, 45 days. And so Sandy, my sister, running our books all those years, everything was to the penny. So when they requested reports from whatever year for whatever dates, she could give it to them immediately, and it was dead accurate. And so all those years of her I need that receipt for that, and I need, sort of just driving us crazy because everything had to be perfect the whole way. It proved so valuable at the end, and it really helped drive the value of the company to where they felt good paying me what they offered me. They felt good about it. And we were at the closing table, there's 20 lawyers sitting there, and it's me. And this will circle back to my granddad. They go, we bought and sold a lot of businesses over the years, but you are the first business we've ever bought where the owner got to keep everything that we paid him. You're the first debt-free business we've ever bought. Wow. And so, that really just closed the book right there on this is how I was supposed to live. It's how I was supposed to be.
What a lesson. You did your business the right way.
Yeah.
That's
it worked
amazing.
out great.
And now you got plenty of time to ride more motorcycles, and
Exactly. It
all circles back to
I have ridden more motorcycles than
If you would
years
have kept
past.
it 20 more years, you might not be able to hop on one.
No. Well, mentally, no. I would have been toast, right?
One of my main questions, though, is were you able to pay your wife back from the initial investment?
So that amount, thankfully, was just, a couple of zeros beyond what I originally borrowed from her. So yes, I paid back her initial investment with interest.
I love that.
Good interest.
Yeah, I
That's
love
awesome.
that. Man.
Yeah, I'm thankful.
Well, dude, your story has inspired me. Like, even from the outside, I don't think you even realize how many people you inspired that you didn't even come into your radar. Because you were inspiring me for years before I even knew you. And then as I got to know you, I was like, man, not only does this guy run his business the right way, he's a good Christian man. He treats his employees well. When we went into your office that day, I was intimidated, but you treated me like I was family, right off the rip. And that's a lot to be said about that, and I think that's why you had so much success. We were listening to a podcast just recently about the guys who make it a lot of times do kind of get crapped on a little bit, taking advantage of kind of the tolerance you're talking about, but your heart was so big that people just kept coming back.
Yeah, and I'll say, as far as you guys coming in there, I think a big reason that I was so, how you just described, I sat in that office in Atlanta with a tie on and all these people putting on this big corporate attitude all the time, and we're big business, and they're acting like we're big business, and I'm over here going, man, I just want to laugh and have fun. And here comes, and I knew Rob, that's who I knew. And you guys come in there and you got incredibly good ideas, and you didn't put on a suit and tie for me. That seriously, it just made me want to be around you. And it made me say, I'm going to do business with you guys. And you created the video for my website, which still gets talked about to this day.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it really does. Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. Well, it's been an amazing podcast. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for thinking of me.
Dude,
for real.
It's been a blessing. It's been a blessing to have you on, and I can't wait to do more with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much.